Good evening, everyone. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. All right. So, I'm humbled and honored to have been asked to lead this discussion on civics 101 surrounding this book, Fahrenheit 451, given the time and the times and tenor in which we live. First, though, I'll be remiss, and some of you know this already. Whenever I step foot in this library, or any library, before I begin, I have to talk a little bit about this book, The Black West. It has nothing really to do with this discussion, but for the fact that on page 240, there's a picture of four men on horses, one of whom happens to be my great-grandfather, Neely Factor, my mother's grandfather. He was one of the first African American United States deputy marshals appointed in this country, served in what was then the Oklahoma Indian Territory, and yeah, one of the first. And you've heard of Bass Reeves. You read the story about Bass. Bass Reeves was one of his colleagues and contemporaries who I think they said the story about the Lone Ranger was actually based on Bass Reeves. So another African American. So I have to give honor and tribute to my great grandfather, Neely Factor, my mother's grandfather. And just so you know, it's a sidebar. He died 2 weeks after I was born. And my mother, of course, tells the story. And I guess you always had to believe your mother. My mother says that he did hold me in his arms prior to him passing and transitioning. And according to my mother, he looked at me and then looked at my mother and said, "This boy would be somebody one day." So I'm hoping that I'm trying to fulfill Grandpa's legacy, great Grandpa's legacy, by being here today and doing the things that I've been able to do, been blessed to do. But Grandpa Neely, I got to give him a shout out. That being said, so I'm here to talk a little bit about this book. So this for anyone, has anyone read the book? You familiar with this book? Okay, good. Oh, great. So you're gonna help me with this book. We're gonna talk about this here. All right. Michael Twitty just came in, one of our board members. Mike, how are you, sir? So here's the thing. So when you research this book, before we get into the integral parts of the book, it's defined as dystopians. Dystopian, is that correct? Dystopians. Is that right? So for the young people, actually all of us young people. Interesting word. And the definition is relating to or denoting an imagined state or society. An imagined state of society where there's great suffering or injustice. Relating to or denoting an imagined state, imagine. Now, we can get some realities in a minute. An imagined state or society where there's great suffering or injustice. Now, if you take that definition, right, and we know this already from our own history, and especially being in this library and given the history of the time in which my great-grandfather lived, you can make the case, certainly the indigenous folk first, can make the case that they've been in a dystopian state for like 500 years, right, to this very day. Right, you make that argument where there's great suffering or injustice, right? They can make that argument and have a sound argument and sound case to make before any court or before any tribunal. Certainly, African Americans, people of African descent, can make a similar and comparable argument. Going back to 1619 to the present, clearly, a great suffering and injustice still to this very day. And then you can put in the different groups that some of us are part of, from women generally to the injustices women have faced from inequities from day one to the present. Other people of color, whether Latinos, Asians, other folks from different nationalities and ethnic groups. So as a general proposition, we can make that argument. And if you get more specific in terms of what Bradbury gets to in this book about censorship, banning books, or even banning having books, there were laws on the books in certain states in this country where it was against the law for African Americans to read a book, to own a book, or even for a white person to teach an African American to read. Against the law, people put in jail. Let's be clear. Right here in Connecticut, you know the story. Prudence Crandall, right up the road in Canterbury, 50 miles from where we sit. Teacher wanted to teach. Thought it was a good idea as a teacher, as an educator. The black girls should be able to go to school like white girls and learn, be educated. Right in Connecticut. Sounds like a pretty good idea, don't you think? Yeah. But the people in Canterbury had different opinions, and so when as black girls were coming to the school, they were throwing bricks in the school. They burned the school, while the children were in the school, and of course people escaped, and of course they arrested Prudence Crandall in Connecticut, put her in jail. For what? What's the crime? You teaching black girls how to read against the law in Connecticut. So again, dystopian in one sense, in Canterbury, Connecticut for sure, and even the state of Connecticut, quite frankly, during that period of time in 1830. So it's important. So if you take different segments and parts of history, we can certainly support the fact that at different points and different times, and for significant periods of time, if you talk to someone who's indigenous or talk to someone who's even a person of color, or even women generally, about how the mistreatment, the disparate treatment throughout the society for hundreds of years since this country was founded, we can make that case. But certainly, but as we get to Bradbury's argument and related to today about censorship, and then of course some of us are not old enough to remember, but you've heard of this guy McCarthy, Joseph McCarthy, right? You know, it's a terrible time, horrendous time in this country's history, and aftermath of World War II. And I guess there was a concern about this growing cancer, if you will, of communism that was about the people feel was going to grip the world and take over the world. And so if you had, and there had been people in this country going back to the early to 1920s and 30s who had sympathies for the communist way of life and the communist philosophy, because it was counter to the capitalist philosophy, which is the rich get richer. You've heard that before. That's what rich get richer. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the majority of folk remain, either underpaid and underserved. And so there was an attraction for many to socialism and communism. So, and as that point of view began to expand and grow in the aftermath of what happened in, I guess primarily in Russia, and even in China in the 40s and 50s, there was a growing concern in this country that we can't let communism take root here, and we have to weed it out. So Mr. McCarthy, Senator McCarthy, decided he would just start. He had a committee of notorious folk, which brings us back to the day in a minute, who was singling people out, targeting folks. If you had what they call communist or socialist sympathies or sensibilities, you were brought before the committee. If you were actors or business people or lawyers or even politicians, your careers were ruined. Your life was ruined. People literally lost their businesses, lost their livelihoods. Were screwed. Some people had to leave the country because they were singled out and called before Mr. McCarthy's committee, and with the assistance of course, then the FBI director, Mr. Hoover, who you've heard about, who had his own notorious ways of doing things that we'll talk about in a little bit. But the point I'm making is that was a period of time during the 1950s when Senator McCarthy had in McCarthy era, and historians would cite that was another period of dystopian. Just a dystopia, I guess, if you will, in this country, fear, and a country where there was people suffering great injustice and great suffering and injustices during that period of time. And of course, we can talk about the civil rights movement, et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of bringing us to today, and I had a teacher who in law school who said that whenever you're speaking to folks, as a lawyer, or even as any other profession that you may be in, you have two options. You can either dazzle them with your brilliance or baffle them with some BS. Because these children here, I won't use the word, but y'all get what I'm saying. Either dazzle them with your brilliance or baffle them with some BS. And I think, and if we take that, I thought that was my constitutional law professor, God rest his soul, Professor Gordon. And that's something that stuck with me all these years in terms of, we look, when you hear people speak, whether they're elected officials, politicians, doesn't matter, business folk, and you try to glean through what they're talking about, what they're saying. Sometimes, that what I just said, that philosophy or that way of thought, that school of thought that Professor Gordon shared with me 40 years ago, still sticks with me in terms of, folks, what are they trying to tell me? Are these folks really know what they're talking about, or is this some BS that they're trying to run past us? And our task is, as young people, as not so young people, we have to figure this thing out and sort it out. And sometimes it's difficult. It's very difficult to do. So when we get to this book, so in Bradbury's book, and he talks about, his book was written in 1953, which is really actually in the heart of, in the midst of the McCarthy era. So he's a writer, a novelist. He's watching this as a writer, as an observer of American society and culture, saying, well, this is what's going on here. He's seeing people being singled out, people being targeted, people's lives being ruined, livelihoods being ruined, and of course, and across the country, in conjunction with the McCarthy era, there were book bannings. There were books being singled out. There were books being taken off shelves. In fact, this book was taken off shelves. It's been banned several times. It's in several states, in many school districts around the country, to this very day. To this very day, right? I mean, to this very day, Bradbury's books his books have been banned because he was looking at and focusing in on. He tells the story of this firefighter who was charged, had the responsibility of finding books and burning books, censorship. And Bradbury's task was to try to present this to us in a way that, even though yes, it was fiction, but he was trying to show us how life can imitate art in this instance. And we've seen things going around the country during his era. And then of course he looks back on this 40, 40 years later, and then people interviewed him about it, and he said, well, yeah. And he saw even then that he saw semblances of the dystopian society being implemented and being instituted in different places in the country. And certainly, even before Mr. Trump got elected, we've heard about it, even during the Biden era, and even when Barack Obama was president, in different states around the country, you read his stories, right, about school boards banning books, voting to ban certain books, and legal cases being filed across the country by civil libertarians and First Amendment folk about, wait, you can't do this. And but it showed, but what we witnessed was a beginning that actually led to the election of Mr. Trump. It wasn't that Mr. Trump started this. There were people out there in the communities who were buying into his way of thinking, quite frankly, or this school of thought, and which I think which actually went from a snowball to an avalanche around the country. And so here we are today in terms of dealing with this stuff. But I want to. What I want to do, I really don't want to talk to you. I want you to talk to me, especially those who read the book, and get some feedback from you in terms of how you see it, how you see Mr. Bradbury's position, or the arguments that he was making, or the positions he was taking, how it relates to how, and we do some comparisons to what's going on today. Yes, ma'am. What do you think? I'm seeing in a number of discussions over the years to this very day defining what is capitalism, actually. And because some people make the argument that we are not really a capitalist society. We say that we are, but not really, that we really aren't. You know, I mean, we have vestiges of capitalism and a little bit of socialism, a little bit, in here, but we're a capitalist country and we stand on that and whatever. But define it. They ask them to define it, and well, and they tell you something else. Similar with socialism, in terms of, and so again, especially during the 40s, well, actually from the 1920s until, I guess you could say through the 60s, even maybe to some extent to the present, there's still considerable debates that are going around the country about which system is better. There is no pure socialist country. There's no pure capitalist country. There's no pure communist country. Even though people say this is our government, this is what we stand for, but if you can poke holes in what they do, some things that the governments do and implement that certainly detract from what a communist country is, a socialist country might be, or certainly a capitalist country might be. So it's something, but it's worth studying, and it's something that we certainly take note of. But I think it's important to understand, and so, but the way it was portrayed, going back to the historic context, was always portrayed that communism was evil, and it's anti-American. It's not what we want to stand for. You can't, have sharing the goods and sharing the wealth. The government can't be in charge of everything and make sure that everyone gets a fair share and equitable share. No, we can't do that. That's what we stand for. We believe that, each individual, each person has a right to achieve whatever they want to achieve. They want to make a gazillion dollars and somebody else is homeless. Hey, too bad. The opportunity is there. So the challenge is of those in charge has always been, let's make sure the opportunity is there for everybody. And that has not been the case. We know that, right? It's not been the case. That we espouse that as a value and a principle, but we have not implemented programs or followed through with that policy over the years in this country. And that's been the challenge of the American government and the powers that be. And similarly, even those, if you go study a socialist government, even communist governments, you would probably get a similar, those who live in those countries criticize them for not upholding and at least adhering to the principles that govern socialism and communism. Although I would tell you this, there are people, I don't know if anyone's been to Cuba? Who's been to Cuba? Mike has been. And Mike, maybe you can speak on this. Everyone that I've ever spoken to, Mike, you can answer this if you will, who traveled to Cuba felt that, and Castro got a lot of bad press in this country, as you know. And some of it justified, some of it not. But in terms of what he stood for as a socialist/communist leader, there was free education, free healthcare. There were no rich folk Even so, the athletes that come from Cuba, who played, they were treated with dignity and respect, and they were held up as heroes, of course, and sheroes of the government of the country. But they weren't making the money that they were making here, because the system is set up so that we're not going to have that here. You'll be able to eat and sleep, have a roof over your head, and we'll take care of you. But we're not. But again, the balance again. Each one according to their needs, and so implementing that, though, it's tough. It's difficult. Whether it's in Cuba, whether it's in China, or certainly whether it's in other countries, and certainly in here, these goals. This is what we like to do. We like to be. We aspire to be, even if you aspire to and adhere to, and swear by capitalism or capitalist thought or philosophy, then we have to make the argument that we aren't there. Some people are. Some people can say, yes, I'm benefiting greatly from this type of society. Other folks say, no, not really. I'm not. Never have. And so you had that discussion. And you can have that discussion any day of the week, right? In any city or county or suburb in this country. Conversely, and I suspect in a country like Cuba, there are folks who have questions and concerns about, on the one hand, we appreciate the system, what the system is trying to do and aspire to, but we have some flaws and some shortcomings in this system too. It may be a little fairer and more equitable than maybe that your society in the United States, but we have issues too. And again, so I think there's something, because the human beings, because again, we are human, all of us are human beings, no matter what skin color, what ethnicity, what language you speak. Human beings run these operations, run these institutions, right? And so because of that, we're subject to human frailties, human shortcomings, no matter where you are. So our task is no matter where you are, no matter what citizen of what country you're in, your job is to hold your government accountable. You said you want to do this, but you're doing this, or you're not doing that. And that continues to be our challenge, especially as we look at what's going on today. And I think if we bring it back to today, I'm sorry, I cut you off. Actually, another comment on that? I want to just read just quickly. And there was an interview with Bradbury back in the in 1980s, I think. He says, and he saw these forms of media, the rise of television in particular. He's talking about television and the golden age of radio, golden age of television. He saw these, I'm quoting, he saw these forms of media as a threat to the reading of books. Indeed, as a threat to society, as he believed they could act as a distraction from important affairs. We see that clearly now, especially with social media and with this instrument here, this thing, which is a source of a lot of information, but it's a distraction too, major distraction to young people especially. In terms of this is where they get information from. They rely on this, right? Don't you? No, you don't. I'm so proud of the two of you, because that's because your parents is in there. We don't rely on that. Absolutely not. That's good. Well, you're the exception to the rule, and I appreciate that. And that Michael works at the adult ed in the school system. He sees it, and which is why the school system had to ban phones, right? And beginning this year, I think there was one school. But once, yeah, okay, we'll see, because there's just so much concern by teachers. That being said, I don't want to digress, but any other comments about this? I think we're leading us to today. I think the concerns was, again, if we look at what's going on with the country today, you can make the argument, as we said, if we look at that definition again of dystopian, relating to or denoting an imagined state. It's not really imagined for us; it's real, or society where there's great suffering or injustice. When you have the President of the United States saying he's going to take over the African American History Museum because he thinks lies are being told or the history is being distorted. What does that mean? What does that mean? We don't know what that means. So, have anybody ever been to the museum? Those of us who have been to the museum, a lot of folks here have been there. So you've been there a few times. You see what's there. And so what is this man going to do? Who is he going to put in charge? Who is he going to change? We don't know. This man. You have a comment?
Oh, no.
I don't know, but and that's just one example. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in terms of just things being turned upside down. Well, even this book was banned because there were words. I think there was hell and damn, a few other words that back in the 50s, and it was banned in certain school districts. And so Bradbury and his lawyers had to go to court, and the ACLU had to go to court. And in some instances, they were able to get the words restored. They said they keep the book on the shelves, but he had to take those words out and edit his own book. It's like, come on. So, so you're right. But we've seen that, and so that argument, actually, right here in New Haven, that was an issue with the school board on Huckleberry Finn. saying should it stay in or stay in, and so that was a big debate. Quite frankly, even in the African American community, some people say, well, it's reflective of the time in which we lived, and it tells a story, and so there was a considerable debate about whether it should stay or not. You're right, Mike. So if you look at like Huxley's Brave New World and Orwell's 1984, and then you put 451, like in the kind, and so all three of those books were talking about us, and where we might be, where we might go, what we might do, and we can make the argument even in this country that there have been we've had points in this country, and maybe even we're in one right now, where all those things are coming together, the government, 1984, of course, which is the government control. Big Brother is watching you, and you can make the argument Big Brother is watching us. Anytime you get on the computer or your iPad, people making the contention that someone's watching you. You're watching them, but they're watching you whenever you go in. And so I don't know. And so there's concern, but how we balance it out is the question we have to face. My last count, they're close to 200 lawsuits, 200 presently, and probably more, that have been filed across the country by different entities, from civil liberties to different folks who want to support and uphold the Constitution of the United States. So what are these folks doing? And the problem is they don't get a lot of play and publicity because of the media bent even now. But there are people fighting and challenging, even right in Connecticut. There have been any number of attempts and efforts by clergy as well as lawyers, from owner to attorney general to other legal groups, legal services, and others have come together and said they would form some coalition to fight and go into court and fight and challenge some of these things that's going on. But it's almost like state by state, almost city by city, state by state. We have to fight this. And there's a national effort. But the problem, of course, the practical problem is that we got ourselves in this jam. The folks in control the key entities in the government, Congress and the White House and the Supreme Court, quite frankly. Think about it. So all three branches of government presently, in terms of civics 101, and that's rare. That's rare. But it's happened throughout history, and whether it's Democrat or Republican, there have been different points and along the way. But right now, in our present scenario and situation, in our present dystopia, if you will, the executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branches of the federal government are controlled by the same party, by the same folk. We have the same mentality. So in terms of saying, what can we get? Because there have been points in our country, as you know this from your own history, that there was a balance somewhere that you would say, well, the president may be over here, but at least there's a balance in the Congress. Or the Congress and the president may be here, but the Supreme Court will check them. That ain't the case now. They all own us, at least we know. We don't know for sure. There'll be another month or so. There'll be some Supreme Court renders major decisions in June before they close for the session, for the season, if you will. So we'll see what happens. But my chances are that there'll be a lot of the cases that are coming that will be ruled on will be consistent with the philosophy of the powers that be, of the White House primarily, and to some extent the Congress. And so that's the dilemma we face. So in terms of what we do, how we fight, that we have to remember that there's another election. In spite of what coming out of the White House's mouth, there will be another election in 2 years. There'll be an attempt, a year and a half now, in 2020, next year, 2026, there'll be congressional elections across the country. And we have a chance as Americans to say, you know what, we saw this, we see it, we feel it, we don't like it. We're gonna flip this a little bit. There's an opportunity, and that's happened time and time again throughout American history. You can cite it, even when Barack Obama got in. The Congress got flipped, and after his first term, remember, and so it happens, and it can happen. Whether it will happen is up to us. So most point, you can't. So we shouldn't be quiet on this. I mean, even though it's the odds are like overwhelming at this moment. So gee whiz, where do we go? I mean, the Congress, the Supreme Court, the President. Oh, gee. Well, no, the power is still within us. We had the power. It's still power of the people. The government, of and by the people. So if you believe that, internalize that, you got to figure out how you make that happen. How do you work on the local level? But it starts here. We can't change what's going on in North Dakota, but we certainly can change what's going on in New Haven and what's in Connecticut, how it's impactful. And of course, Connecticut is like a blue island in the midst of a Red Sea, which is why it's like what Rosa can say what she says, but Connecticut is probably the only state in the country where every federal representative is different. Because the clarion call is going out for you to do some work and to fight what Bradbury tried to address in the book about the complacency and the government control and censorship and that was like 70 years ago. This book was written in 1953, and yet you read it and you say, well, gee, this is going on right now. We see semblances of what Bradbury, wrote about 70 years ago, in this book. And so it's important for us to, I think so I commend the Arts and Ideas folk for choosing this book. It's timely because of what's going on in the country right now, and I commend you for that. But I think it's how we incorporate it, how we take it, how we take the lessons of Orwell's 1984, of Huxley's Brave New World, and certainly of Bradbury's book, in the context of where we are now, and be encouraged that there's a battle to be fought. You have and a battle to be engaged in. So you can't run away from the struggle. You got to become engaged in it, as frustrating as it might be. And we know there have been folks in New Haven and Connecticut have been impacted by what's going on nationally. I had one of my students. I think I told you the story. I'm walking down the hallway, Mike, in a Gateway. A student comes to me and said, "Judge, I was going to call you because ICE came to my house. 2 ICE agents came to my house. They were going to take me away. I had to go get my birth certificate that says I'm Puerto Rican. Why am I on the list?" And they said, "Oh, your name is similar to a bunch of other folks because the Latino. That's why we came to you." She said, "But I've been here all my life. My dad is Irish." She said, "My Puerto Rican, my mom is Puerto Rican. My dad is Irish. What? Why are you coming after me?" And of course, they said, "We'd be back." They didn't come back. But the point is, that's been happening right here in New Haven. New Haven, our own neighbors, relatives, friends who've been, and other folks have been. Then the other issue is churches got notice, and you know about this. Churches got notice that churches can't be sanctuaries anymore. Because heretofore, up until to this administration, churches were sanctuaries. If someone were trying to get had an issue with immigration, they could go to a church, a religious facility, and if the pastor embraced them, they could stay there. Remember a couple years ago, I think that was up in Fairhaven. That was an issue with there was a church. And there was a rally there. I went over there. So some of you went there, was there as well. And the young man was held up. I think his family, right? With his family, because, and this is, I think, I'm not sure, I don't know who was the president, didn't matter. But the point I'm making is the church was the haven and the sanctuary. And Mr. Trump, his administration is saying churches can no longer be sanctuaries. Schools can't be sanctuaries. So ICE agents can come into your church, can come into your schools and take children out or take families out. That's scary. And it should be of deep concern to all of us here as citizens of the country. And it goes back to the Constitution again. So the battle is joined, and I think that we just have to know that there are folks fighting. It's not front page news, won't be the lead story on Channel 8. But folks are in the trenches fighting these battles as best they can. The government interprets that. Why? But the challenge for us is, why is it that all the presidents before this man, nobody else decided, even Republicans, and there was some conservative, Nixon was a very conservative Republican. He never did this. Even if you take Ford and Bush and those who followed, both Bushes, neither Bush, who conservative Republicans by their standards, never even thought about crossing that line. So we're not going to cross that line. But now this person comes in with a different philosophy. And you say, well, gee, that doesn't give him the right. So the pushback is, which is why there are 200 lawsuits all around the country saying you can't do this. You crossed the line. Yeah, you may say you think you had the authority to do this, but why is it that now you're doing this? And that's the challenge we have as Americans. What are we going to stand for? Oh, that's okay. No, it's not okay. And churches, many churches don't get government funds. They independent, private. They get church money from grandma and grandpa and auntie who come to church every Sunday. Pay their Social Security money, or pay their pension money, or pay whatever they pay to support those churches. And not the federal government that pays that. There are programs that they may support. But in terms of schools, yeah, there's money that comes down from the federal government to the states for education. Absolutely, no question about it. But and that's why that argument is being debated and discussed in courts. But we have to, as American citizens, concerned about the well-being of your families and your children, where are we going to draw the line, and that's our challenge. I think right now in terms of this, where are we? How much are we going to take? And I think this is why people are saying, some folks are saying, we can't do anything, and others are saying, yes, we can. And I think over the next couple of years, we'll see this come to fruition in the forefront. But you're right. But there's room for debate, no question about it, in terms of this. But I think we have to. But when rights are being violated, when for centuries, not just yesterday, for centuries, sanctuary, church have been sanctuaries for immigrants, Italians, Irish, right? And then not just for people of color that are recent. This has been in place for years. The Catholic Church, in primarily, was a sanctuary for Catholic immigrants from Poland, from Italy, from Ireland, who had issues, and they would work it out. Now it's like, oh, because these folks don't look Irish and Italian and Polish. They look like most of you in this room. We're gonna snatch them up and send them back, and deprive them of rights. And we should be concerned about that. All of us, people's due process rights being violated, and that's been an issue for years. And almost after every presidential election, you hear just talk about we got to abolish it, we got to reform, we got to tweak it, and nothing ever happens. We go back to the same thing. So let's be clear. So just so you know, I gave my final exam. This is my final exam. I gave to my students today at Gateway. I brought it to y'all because the first question is, name the 3 branches of the federal government. Go ahead.
Executive, judicial, and legislative.
Thank you so much. You're so wonderful. And then I guess name the head of the executive branch, of course, president. And I'm just reading it through the leaders of the legislative branch, but also in the judicial branch. Name the 3 branches of Connecticut state government. To our students, our New Haven students, state level. Name the governor. Just basic stuff. Who is the governor? Who's the governor, young people? This is my student. I'm asking, talking to them. Name the cabinet members. The cabinet members, Connecticut state government. What are they? Treasurer, state, lieutenant governor. Yeah, all those. Yeah, so the people who run the government. Who runs the state government? And then, of course, who's the Chief Justice of Connecticut Supreme Court? It's his brother-in-law. Who's the Chief Justice of the Connecticut Supreme Court? Anybody? This is civics. We need to know. This is my students. My students had to answer this. Raheem Mullins. Just got sworn in 2 weeks ago. Yeah, Richard Robinson was the Chief Justice before he stepped down because of some health issues with his wife. Raheem Mullins from Stanford, young black lawyer, is the Chief Justice. I'm sorry.
You're teaching this in the
these are high school students. High school students at it's a gateway to college program. So these are high school students coming out of New Haven school system, and so that's why I keep it kind of simple like this and straightforward. But it's important that they know. Then of course I didn't, and then name who's the mayor of New Haven. There's another question on here. Who is your older person? So just quickly, sidebar. Remember the 15-year-old that got killed a couple weeks ago, right in the hill, right in the cuffs of the hill. One of my students in my class said, I grew up with him. I know him, knew the family. I said, well, she said, so what are we gonna do about this? I said, I don't know. I said, this is you're older. Give her a call. She needs to hear from you, a teenager who grew up, who knew this young man, who's concerned about what's going on out here. I said, call her. No, I said, this is her name, this is her number. Call her. That's what we have to do. You got to get engaged. You have to be engaged. If you can, and I told the students that us, except for these two, we don't have all the answers. Otherwise, this stuff can keep going on. I mean, we do the best we can, but we don't have that. Dan, you do, your family, other folks out here you're doing the best you can in terms of educating and enlightening folks, in terms of understanding and appreciating what's going on out here. That's kind of implicit in what Mr. Bradbury is saying. But it's how do we deal with that? Why is it that a 15-year-old can get a gun? Or a 12-year-old can get a gun? I tell the story. Diane has heard me, and Mike has heard me tell this story many times. When I did a program right down the street on Winchester Avenue at Lincoln Baptist School. 6th, 7th, and 8th grade boys, black and brown. When one stood up and said, Mr. Graves, I can get a gun quicker than I can get a library book. I can get a gun, 6th grader, quicker than I can get a library book. Something's wrong with that picture, right? Something's very wrong with that. In our city, in our town, that a 6th grader says, I can go out in the street and get a gun quicker than I can get this library book. That's a problem. That's a problem we have to deal with. But it's indicative, implicit in some of the things that Bradbury is talking about in the book in terms of where we are as a government, as a society. How do we address it? How do we educate and enlighten our children in terms of what they should do, how they attack it? You're right. They need to be informed voters and understand why to vote and what's the point. But you're absolutely right in terms of the pushback, the feedback that I got. I'm sure you've gotten it as well. Diane gets it, Mike gets it, so many of you get it. Marshall, Martha got it from students, young people. Their contemporaries is that, why? Why am I voting? Who am I voting for? Why should I vote? And no matter who's in there, same stuff happens. Nothing trickles down to us. We see no significant changes, in New Hallville and Dixville, and Fairhaven and the Hill, the street, whatever it might be, in my life. My parents are influential, and God bless you both for raising these children where you have and informing them. But unfortunately, a lot of parents don't have the same commitment that you have, right? And it's reflective in what we see and what happens in the street. I showed up on the board. I know I'm digressing, but it's tied in directly to this. I showed on the screen the percentage, the breakdown of people who killed by gun violence in the country. Shouldn't surprise anybody here. The overwhelming majority of black young men, black boys usually, getting shot and killed by each other, not by the police, but people look like them. Next were Latinos, next were whites, and Asians at the bottom. And I said to my students, I said, y'all see this? And they looked at it and said,
right. So now you blame Trump for that, or you gotta look at your local government?
Well, we gotta look at us, not just go government. We gotta look at us as a community, as a family. Yeah, I can't blame Trump for that, but Trump didn't help it. I mean, his philosophy. He said he's going to do all this, and we haven't seen anything constructive along those lines. He's done yet, but he may. It's only been 3-4 months. We'll see. But we see. But beyond that, but the issues. You're right. So, but issues whether it's Barack Obama. When Barack Obama was president, 800 young boys were shot in his hometown of Chicago that year. 800 black boys were killed in Chicago when Barack was president. You got to believe he said, "Gee, I'm president. What can I do about this?" And they had to hurt us. I'm sure it had to hurt him. That's his hometown, right? So it's not. So we talk about change in terms of the society and the government. It's institutional. And that we have to. It's not just related to just one president, whether it's Barack, whether it's Bush, whether it's Biden, whether it's Trump. It goes beyond the figure, the president. It does. You need to address it. Then your job is, our task is to address it. No matter who's in charge, no matter what party's in. You're right. As citizens, as residents, as taxpayers, your job is okay. I'm going to attack this and address this. Make sure holding people accountable. That comes down to it. Holding folk accountable. That's our task, our job. I think as a culture, become desensitized to the violence and to death. It's like, okay, 15-year-old gets killed. All right, go to school the next day. Keep moving. I had one of my students tell me, said that who knew the young man, they said, well, his mistake was he didn't carry his gun with him. That was the response. I'm sorry he got killed, but he had his gun. Had he had his gun with him, he might be alive today. That's the mentality. That's the mindset, sadly, about children. That this is just tit for tat. You got your gun, and that's not right. Something's wrong with that picture. We and I try to tell you can't accept it. We can't accept that for them. They've accepted it, but we can't accept that for them. Our job and our task is, and again, go back to this book again. The tone and the tenor that Bradbury is saying is in terms of with censorship, whether it's banning books or burning books, whatever it might be, the mindset of the government taking charge of that, and the government are not taking charge, and not taking hold of this, and the fact that no matter who's in the White House, if they don't take ownership of this in some form or fashion, folks know where the guns are coming from. Somebody knows where these guns are coming from. They aren't just jumping out of the sky. Just being dropped down in Dixville, in New Hallville, and there's got to, someone knows where the guns are. Yeah, by design. Yeah, how the guns, yeah, and cocaine, yeah, it's to destroy us. So we have to figure out internally how do we fight that and battle that, and because as I said at the outset, this whole this dystopian, it's not the definition is relating to or denoting an imagined state or society where there's suffering or injustice. In our context, it's not imagined. It's real, right? It's real. It's our reality, right? It's our reality. It's not imagined. It was imagined for Mr. Bradbury as he wrote the book. Thank you, Bob, for coming. Thank you, Martha. Thanks for coming. We'll see you soon. All right. We know it's reality. As I said at the outset, it's our reality. And something we have to address. How do we deal with it? So I started to say earlier, I'm sorry, as I was coming in, one of the young men downstairs was having a meeting with elders to talk about who we are, what we need to do. He said, I told him the topic was this. He said, well, what are we going to do? That was the question. What are we going to do? You can talk about it. What are we going to do? And that's our challenge. What are we going to do about this? And what we're facing, how do we make the challenges? Good, bad, and ugly. Party affiliations aside, what is the philosophy? What are the principles of folk that are guiding and leading this country? And do you agree with them or not? If you don't, fine. Then what are you going to do about it? If you agree with it, fine. That's fine too. But let's wait and see how this thing plays out. You mentioned which museum were you talking about? The one in Washington, Connecticut? The indigenous, or the one in Washington, D.C.? But the indigenous people. You said you saw the indigenous people who, and the one in D.C.? And there have been criticism of that. And even the one in Washington, Connecticut, that there's an Indigenous Peoples Museum about 50 miles from here. And some people, Washington, Connecticut. You should go. Yeah, right. Just yeah. Washington, about 50 miles from here, right up past Woodbury, up in there, Woodbury. Yeah, Litchfield, up in there, Litchfield County. Yeah. Good point. But I want to commend you and piggyback on you. Thank you, Chef. Thank you for your work and your service. I appreciate that. And I would just say to you, I'm sure your parents say you all the time, just because it is what it is right now, doesn't mean it doesn't have to always be like that. So in your generation, you have your lifetimes ahead of you. You can say, you know what? And there are people around the country, and you have the benefit of the social medias and the networking around the country. So you know what? Maybe we'll start a movement to get rid of electoral college. We start working on that now. As you go through college and go on and whatever professional career endeavors, you could. I got to believe there are allies around the country. I'm absolutely certain, right here in Connecticut and beyond, who may feel the same way. Let's look at that. Why do we still need that? Is it still beneficial? Is it detrimental to the country? That's something you can look at. Just that issue right there. Of course, that was set up to achieve some type of balance, population balance, so that Rhode Island and Massachusetts and Delaware would have comparable say in the electoral process as Texas and Florida and California and New York. That's kind of how it was set up. But it's going awry. But that's another story for another day. Going back to just quickly before Kevin, I hear from you on the Native American issue. The indigenous people is a controversial issue and complex because of the intermarriage and over centuries. I mean, this is just not last year. It's like hundreds of years of intermarriage and intermingling and what have you. So you're right. So Diane's right. You can have a group. This group was full. This meeting was full of. Right, this is a call meeting of indigenous folk. We could all pass. We could all be. Kevin could be indigenous. You could be indigenous. I could. The Cameron person here. We all could claim some type of connection to the Cherokee, Choctaw, Seminole, whatever. So Pequot, Mohegan, whatever it might be, because there are scores of tribal nations that's still around. My grandfather, who I showed you a picture of, my great grandfather, who I showed you a picture of, spoke 5 different languages. He spoke every indigenous language in what was in the territory of Oklahoma. He spoke it. Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole. I'm missing one. He spoke he spoke it fluently. That's how he could communicate and do his job. So the point is that, and he married an indigenous woman. So the point is that in terms of that issue, we have a whole discussion on that. But I hear you. I was just saying. So you mentioned Mr. Trump just quickly. Sidebar. So when Mr. Trump wanted to build before he became president years ago, you remember this? Bridgeport wanted to build a casino on the water there, right? On the waterfront, and they were courting different investors. You remember this, Kevin? So Mr. Trump comes in and says, I'll build my Trump casino tower. And the meeting was with the Golden Hill Progressives, who look like most of the folk in this room. Mr. Trump walks away. As he walks out the room, he says, they don't look like Indians to me. That was his comment. They don't look like Indians to me. So, but that was years ago. But the point I'm making is mindset, and it's not just him, the mindset of people in terms of what indigenous folk look like, is supposed to look like. And it's just like based on ignorance. People don't know. And I think I think they would tell you, and depending on who you talk to, the different group you talk to, that there's differences in the stress even among them, and divisions among them about who does what and whatever. But that being said, it's a good point. And we're going to wrap this up in a minute. I want to hear any other comment. Kevin, you had your hand up. I'm sorry. Okay. Abolish.
The police.
The police? Okay. All right. Tell us your name. Julia says we should abolish the police. And what would we have instead, an alternative? Interesting. See? Creative approach. And there is and I think during last year, so during the election, there was a town in the Midwest that actually did abolish the police department. They said we don't need it. with the police department. We're going to do something else. Restorative justice. They put some other folks in place, another system in place, but the town voted to abolish the police department, defund the police. And they said, we do something else. They had an alternative. So it's been tried. So thank you.
And it sounds right.
So the government makes the money, and you get it, and then you give it to your sister, and then she gives it to somebody else, and right? I mean, that's how it works. But good. Okay, I got you. Okay, we get back to him. Okay, okay. All right, but I hear that's interesting approach. So you get rid of money. You get rid of money, and or guns, or both. The right to bear arms. You don't agree with the Second Amendment interpretation that everyone has the right to bear arms. Good point. That's very thoughtful. If you're not in the military, only people in the military should have guns. The rest of us shouldn't. Because okay, all right. And that's a noble principal goal to see, and that's been talked about in different venues, different cities, different towns about getting rid of guns and even the police, taking the guns away from the police. Some people talked about that as well. But because clearly it was, and I want to hear from your sister, but I think for us to say, again, keeping in context Bradbury's book about government control, government overly influence and doing things, how do we take control back? Because this whole point was with the burning of the books and banning of books was we have to take control. The people have to take control again. We have to retake control of the government and our resources and the access to stuff. And so what do we do? And your point is we can do something different than what we're doing now. Because what we're doing now ain't working, right? That's your point. As a young person, you see, this ain't working. It's a gripping issue and overwhelming. It can be overwhelming. How do you address this? So many guns, so many folks getting killed every day. Teenagers, your age, getting shut down in the streets. It's like what? And I don't know if you're dad, but just quickly before we wrap this up, I know I've been in any number of sessions, and I'm sure others can attest to this. When I posed the question to young people, how many of you know someone's been shot or killed? See, hands going up already. Yeah, you know, your age. I mean, and if you ask the older folks, over 25, how many people that you know been shot and killed? We like, yeah, we know. But relatively speaking, if this is all adults, like over 25, and we had the children of all our children over here under 25, more hands would be shown on those under 25 than those over 25. Yes, no, we agree with that. Because in terms of knowing folk, and that's a travesty and a tragedy, and it's sobering that's our reality right now, right? It's an important question, and I think and a challenge to all of us all the time. I mean, an issue comes up, during the election season, post-election season, pre-election season, all the time. What do we do? How do we hold folk accountable? Ultimately, it comes down to us holding people accountable. Whether you voted for Mayor Ellicott or not in New Haven, or Mayor, what's the mayor in Hamden? Garrett, whoever, let's say even New Haven, whoever you live, whether you voted for that person or not, if you voted for them, certainly you have a right to raise questions, right to approach them, say, listen, I voted for you, and you said you're gonna do this, or you haven't done this yet. And they're accountable to you. And no matter what town or city you live in, and if you didn't vote for them, that's all the more reason to say, I didn't vote for you, but you're the mayor of everybody. And they will tell you that, yeah, you didn't vote for me, but my job is to be mayor for everybody, whether you voted for me or not. That's right. That's their challenge. That's their charge. That's their responsibility, right? So then you have a right to say, look, you don't tell them what you voted for. You don't have to, but you can tell them I didn't, but I still hold you accountable, and you're right, and you have a right to do that. And I think we just don't do enough of that. We don't do enough of that. I think some people do, but not enough of us do. We don't hold people accountable, and you have a right too. You have a right to write letters, to write emails, to call them up, bombard them. Hey, I got a problem with this. I'm telling you, I worked for 4 different mayors. 4. I mean, I'm old. I've been around a long time. I worked for 4 different mayors. I'm trying to tell you, they've been working in those offices. They respond to folk who call them, who contact them, who either storm the office, or write them emails, call them on the phone. I got a pothole over here on Townsend Avenue. I picked Townsend Avenue for obvious reasons, and they respond because they look at the vote and say, who voted in Townsend Avenue? So they got 70% of people voted. I better get my butt over there. Get somebody over there, Public Works, get over there tomorrow, fix that pothole. Newhallville, on the other hand, I got a pothole on Winchester Avenue, Mayor. Okay, Let me look at the voting record here. Newhallville. Oh, 25%. I get to it. I make note of it, but we get to it when we get to it. That's how they do it. I'm trying to tell you. You know this. So your point is, your father's point is absolutely right. We have to be engaged, no matter, and you got to let folks know who you are, that you're a voter, you're a taxpayer, and that I got a problem with this. And the more you can call them 10 times, they'll make note. They call 10 times about this issue. I need to do something about this. But Kevin knows this as a reporter. They're responsive to the extent that you keep a foot in there behind. Sorry. Yeah, but yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Y'all okay with that? Okay. Good. Okay. I mean, no disrespect, but that's how it works. You have to stay engaged, as you heard, engaged and call and respond in the media, email, whatever you have to do. Let them know that you exist, you're here, and that you demand some action. And sometimes it requires persistence, persistence, but it will pay off. But I think the key thing about civics is to understand, and in the context of Bradbury's book, is to make sure we understand the government works for us. We are the government. There are people in place who got elected or selected to be in certain positions, but ultimately they report to us. And we have to remind them, I hear you, understand, respect your position, respect the title, respect what you're doing, but understand you work for me. My taxes pay your salary. My taxes pay for you to do what you do. And therefore, because that's the reality that we need to face, you work for me. And we have to remind folks constantly about that. And I think and that's empowering the electorate. It's a task, it's a trust, because people get frustrated. People get angst. They say, no matter what I do, no matter they're going to do what they're going to do. They respond to. But if you maintain that attitude, they will just respond to those who respond, who responsive to them, who get in their face. So you have to be one of those people who's getting their faces. And then we have to do a better job of organizing, mobilizing, getting ready for elections. If election is coming, we need to start planning now. So, okay, there's an election coming up. In fact, there's a mayor election this year in New Haven, right? In a few months. Nobody's challenging, I think, token challenge. But if we were better organized, we say, I don't like this mayor. Let me start grooming young people and start teaching and informing them how government works, so they can be attuned to the fact that when elections come up for Board of Alders or for Board of Education or for mayor, we can have people in mind and lined up and ready to take and tackle it. And I think we've fallen down. We as a community, collectively, no matter what neighborhood you live in, we have fallen down on that. So and those in power know that. They know that there's no organized opposition. I'm fine. I'll just get the nomination, raise some money, and I'll win again and again. And until such time as in terms of Civics 101, we understand how government works. The government is here for us. They work for us, and we have to hold them accountable in any way we can. So with that, that's probably a good place to close, I guess. Any other closing comments, Kevin? Young ladies, the future, our future here, abolishing police, abolishing money and guns, getting rid of guns. Great, that's consistent. Getting rid of drug abuse, yeah. And again, that's a major challenge. How do we do that? How do we get rid of substance abuse? How do we address drugs in our community and people using drugs and access to drugs? It's a major challenge. It's something we should look at. Yeah, so there you go. It may be, really, exactly like this, on parallel lines. Guns, drugs, guns. I don't know. People made that argument for years, and not being Canada, right? They do. And if you've been to Canada, you drive through the border. They check, but sometimes they check your trunk. Looking back, but for the most part, not the same. I've been to Mexico, and it's completely different than you cross the line in Mexico and go across the border in Canada. Two different systems in place. I'm just saying. Anyway, yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
I'd like to say put education,
Yeah.
bring civic education back in the school.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. Because that test I just showed you in the beginning, my students did not know. They said we didn't know. I don't know. Only a couple knew who Lamont was. Exactly. Don't. You're right. That's right. Don't know. Absolutely. People don't know. That's right. You're absolutely right. That's right. And then you wonder. So you go to your point, which is why we have an uninformed electorate. We don't, and people just vote. Yeah, you're right. We're like cattle being led. Oh yeah, just okay. Or sheep. Exactly. You're right. In many cases, you're right. But listen, it's been one. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate you. I learned. I don't know. I don't know what my job was. Brilliance or BS. I'm not sure, or some combination thereof. But I appreciate you all. Thank you so much, and I thank the Arts and Ideas for inviting me to be a part of this. I've known this young lady for a long since she was like this, and so I'm so proud of her.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming. And keep doing what y'all do.